Shana Tova, everyone. Early on in my rabbinate, I realized that one of the greatest gifts of this life that I had chosen was officiating funerals. I know, it's a little bit strange to hear. And believe me, for a long time it was even stranger to say. And yet it's true. A funeral is not only an end, it's also a beginning. The foundation from which we work through pain and grief and begin to build the bridge of memory. Being trusted and invited to walk through the valley of the shadow of death with a family as they grieve a loved one is profoundly and deeply moving. One of the things that I love most about Judaism is that our tradition is in so many ways countercultural. Where so much of the secular world tells us to bottle up our grief and return to normal life, not only for our benefit, but really for the benefit and comfortability of others, Judaism actually demands that we face it and wear our broken hearts on our sleeves. At the graves where we bury our loved ones, we tear kriya ribbons, and we wear them on our clothing as a symbol of our broken hearts for everyone to see. And in doing so, we ask them to hold us in our grief and our despair, and to lift us up in the warm embrace of community. Whenever I stand with a family for Kriya, I teach that we tear these ribbons to symbolize our broken hearts. When we lose someone that we love, our hearts are ripped open, and it seems in that moment that they may never heal. But we know that the pain that we feel in those moments will at some point change. It won't ever fade completely. But in time, we will begin to heal, and our hearts will find a way to begin to knit the broken pieces back together. The same is true of our Kriya ribbons. If we really wanted to, we could sew that ribbon back together, but it would never look the same, never be the same. It will always have a seam and bear the mark of that time that it was ripped apart and left in tatters. When we love truly and deeply, our hearts and our souls are moved by another person, and we are forever changed. We too will always bear the symbol of our brokenness, sometimes visible and sometimes not, but always a part of us. It's been nearly a year since October 7th, and I feel like I've been in a constant state of grief and mourning every day since that day. I feel grief and pain and trauma and heartache every day. It's there in the background of everything I do, everything I feel, every interaction that I have. This constant weight and worry and despair, it's always there. Even amidst the moments and joy and smiles and laughter, it's there. That inescapable sense of dread that I feel even as I snuggle close to my children, praying that they will never feel the weight of this worry. But I feel it. I feel it here at Temple. I feel it in community meetings. I feel it at interfaith gatherings. I feel it when I'm at the grocery store or watching TV, when I'm at coffee meetings and at dinner with friends. I feel it when I'm tucking my children into bed at night. I wake up with heartache. I move through the day with heartache. I go to sleep at night with heartache. And like so many of you, I don't know how to pull the pieces of my broken heart back together again. Because every time I think that I might be ready to sew those pieces together, my heart is torn apart again and again. I've been wearing an invisible Kriya ribbon for the past year. So tonight, I want to share with you something that I've been wrestling with these past months, because I think you might be wrestling with it too. And that is to understand how to live in this broken world with despair and pain and heartache, and not to become broken people. Tonight, I want to talk to you not about policies or government or solutions, or even about Israel and Palestine. I don't want to debate about who's right and who's wrong. I want to talk about how to live in this broken world of ours, because I believe that our tradition gives us the tools to navigate the darkness and the brokenness and the despair, and yet still see pathways towards hope, and maybe even towards redemption. But those pathways begin by becoming comfortable with the fractured, jagged shards of our heart. Our tradition teaches that brokenness is not weakness, and that our ability to embrace it actually makes us stronger, more resilient human beings. There's even a Yiddish word, no surprises there, that speaks directly to the need to come face to face with our own brokenness. It's called Zebrokenkeit. It means the quality of brokenheartedness that gives strength and healing. It means that we're obligated to gather up, tend to, and honor the pain, but also to take up the work of healing. But how do we go about doing that? How do we honor the feeling of being wholly and utterly shattered while also gathering up what is left and fighting through the grief and the brokenness to work towards something new? Our tradition teaches that brokenness is part of what it means to be human. The world began with brokenness, the mystics of the Zohar teach. They imagine that creation began with an infinite God filling all of space and time, and in order to make room for the creation of the world and those who would live upon it, God had to contract. At that time, the mystics say some of God's light was confined to a handful of vessels, leaving space for the world and for humanity. But God's essence, God's light, was too strong for the vessels, and it could not be contained, and those vessels were shattered, leaving shards scattered across the earth. The sacred work of humanity, we're taught, is to gather up those broken fragments and put them back together through acts of tikkun olam. This is the brokenkeit, the kind of brokenness that can give us strength. Our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu, the great leader and prophet of our people, taught us time and again that the road to healing is not straightforward, and that sometimes what is required of us is to carry all of the different parts of ourselves, the broken and the whole, together. We know this story. We tell it as a warning against the sin of idolatry. It's the one that starts with Moses encountering the divine at the top of Mount Sinai, receiving the gift of Torah, only to learn that the Israelites, in their shameful impatience, have committed this grievous sin of constructing an idol, the golden calf, to worship in place of God. And Moses is so incensed, so filled with righteous anger and holy chutzpah, that he raises these tablets with the words of Torah that God has just finished inscribing on them above his head, and he smashes them. He smashes them. And God, in God's infinite grace and mercy, gifts us with another set of tablets to replace that original broken set. Now here's the important part. The Talmud, in Tractate Bava Batra, tells us that when the Israelites constructed the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the Aron HaBrit, the Ark of the Covenant, that it was designed not only to house that second perfect set of tablets, but also the broken fragments of that first set. The ones that Moses shattered in rage and in despair, the same ones that would be forever a reminder of the fact that he would never enter the promised land. Those shattered, broken remnants, they too were housed in the ark. Zebrokenkeit. The Israelites gathered up the broken pieces. They tended to them and they honored them. They lovingly carried those broken pieces with them every day for 40 years, walking that winding and sometimes elusive path towards hope. We have long been a broken-hearted people, the stories of our brokenness recorded in the Torah to remind us that we are not the first and we will not be the last to wonder how to live amidst pain and heartache. Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, better known as the Kotzker Rebbe, was said to be a rabbi of great wisdom. One day, we're told, a student came to him, perplexed about a specific line of the Shema. Here the student said, here in the second paragraph, this line of Deuteronomy, it says, "You shall place the words upon your heart." But why does it say to place these words of Torah on our hearts? Surely it should say in our hearts. The Rebbe looked at his student and answered, "Our hearts are most often closed, and we cannot place the holy words inside of them. So instead, we place them upon our hearts, and there they stay until those moments in our lives when our hearts break wide open, in those moments the words fall in and embed themselves within our hearts and within our souls. There is nothing more whole than a broken heart. Allow your broken heart to be an opening, the Rabbi seems to say. Throughout our lives, our hearts will undoubtedly shatter, and in those moments of pain, our hearts will be ripped apart at the seams and they will burst wide open. But amidst that pain and that brokenness, there might yet be an opportunity for wisdom and for hope, if only we can be courageous enough and audacious enough to claim it. But in this year of darkness, I have struggled to find the light, struggled to claim the wisdom of my broken heart. I find myself mired in sorrow, my heart and soul pinned down by the wearying, unending cycle of grief. I've shed more tears than I can count, and I've cried out to God in anguish and in anger more times than I care to mention. But that's not wholly unusual for me. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I always have. Whenever I bemoan the fact that my tears come as easily as breathing sometimes, my dear friend is fond of telling me that they're not my weakness, but they are my superpower. I hope they are, because the truth is I would be in good company. The tears of strong women are woven into our story, calling us to recognize the power and the place that grief and heartache occupy in our narrative, right alongside the joy and wonder and beauty and bravery that make our text truly sacred. The tears of these women permeate the very fabric of this holy day that we're here to celebrate. Because while Rosh Hashanah is a day of joy as we celebrate this new year, in the Torah, it's known first and foremost as Yom Teruah, the day of wailing, the day of the piercing cries of the shofar. You see, the rabbis tell us that the sounds of the shofar, those jarring notes that speak to our very soul that we are commanded to hear, they're actually the sounds of weeping mothers. Listen closely, because today we're commanded to hear the cries of their bereft, broken hearts. We're commanded to hear the cries of our matriarch Sarah, who was left behind when Abraham followed God's commandment to take their son Isaac up the mountain and offer him there as a sacrifice. During the entirety of the story that we know as the Akedah, which we'll read tomorrow morning, Sarah sat alone, worried and afraid, not knowing what had happened to her precious child. When Isaac finally returns, Sarah asks him, "Where have you been, my son?" And he answers her, telling her of the harrowing tale of how he was bound on the altar, looking up at his father as he raised the knife, when an angel called out and stayed his father's hand, saving him. Sarah looks at her son and asks him, "Had it not been for the angel, you would have already been slaughtered?" "Yes," Isaac answered. And at that moment, the Midrash tells us, Sarah's heart breaks and she cries out 6 times, corresponding to 6 shofar blasts. So broken-hearted is Sarah in that moment that her soul leaves her body and she dies. The wailing of the shofar, the rabbis say, is a mirror reflecting back to us the wailing cries of a grieving mother. The Talmud gives us yet another interpretation. In Tractate Rosh Hashanah, the rabbis are in the midst of debating about the length of each of the shofar's blasts. The length of the Teruah blast, they say, is equal to the length of 3 whimpers. 3 whimpers. And then the rabbis do something truly remarkable. They connect the whimpers of the shofar to the whimpering of another distraught mother in our text from the book of Judges. But unlike the previous text, where we're connecting to a well-known and beloved matriarch of our people, here the rabbis are linking us to a more obscure passage, a lament from the mother of one of Israel's enemies, General Sisera. Sisera was the commander of the Canaanite army at the behest of a king who had oppressed the Israelites for the past 20 years. Devorah, a judge and prophet of our people, leads the Israelites in battle against an undefeated Sisera, and with God's help, they prevail. In the book of Judges, in Shirat Devorah, the Song of Devorah, we read the words of lament of Sisera's mother, who gazes out the window, whimpering with fear and with trepidation, worrying about why it's taking her son so long to return home from battle. And in the moments that she realizes that her son will not return home, she cries the desperate cries of a grieving mother, 100 cries, the same number of cries that we traditionally hear from the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. What an incredible revelation that the predominant sound of Rosh Hashanah is unfettered grief, the tears of utter devastation of mothers who have lost their children. There is nothing more painful, our tradition says. And that is what we are meant to hear today of all days. So I really want us to think about that together for just a moment, because our texts don't just recognize our matriarch. They don't just talk about Sarah's grief. They also raise up the tears and the brokenhearted wailing of the mother of one of Israel's most bitter enemies, because grief is universal. Imagine if this kind of radical empathy and compassion was how we chose to see the world. What if we didn't just give lip service to the notion that people are in pain everywhere, but really and truly lifted up the one thing that connects us to each other perhaps more than any other single thing? The notion that a broken-hearted parent who will never see their child again is the same no matter where they live. What if we recognize that our hearts are, in fact, capacious enough to own and hold both our own sorrow and the sorrow of our enemy? Because the cries of a broken-hearted Sarah do not only sound the same as those of Sisera's broken-hearted mother, they are the same. And in this year of darkness and of pain, I have to wonder if the secret of the shofar is how we live in the broken world and not become broken people. For as the Kotzker Rebbe says, only when our hearts are broken can the words fall in. The broken kite, maybe, just maybe, those broken and whole notes, those cries of the shofar that weave together, can move us toward redemption. Because redemption to me is not a perfect world. It is the belief in the possibility of change, the notion that we can be audacious enough to dare to believe that things can be better tomorrow than they are today. Tomorrow morning we'll sound the shofar. We'll call out Tekiah, one whole note, Shivarim Teruah, 3 broken notes, 9 staccato notes. Tekiah, one whole note. Tekiah, once I was whole. Shivarim Teruah, in the wear and tear of living, I became broken and shattered. Tekiah, I believe in the possibility of redemption. Even as I live in this broken world, I believe that I can become whole once again. For the past year, I've been wearing an invisible Kriya ribbon. I wake up with heartache. I move through the day with heartache. I go to sleep at night with heartache, and like so many of you, I don't know how to pull the pieces of my broken heart back together again. But I think that maybe the secret has been here all along, to listen to the sounds of the shofar and allow the cries of the broken-hearted mothers to call to us and remind us of our shared humanity. This is the broken kite. Today we are reminded to gather up, tend to and honor the pain, but also to take up the work of healing. Tomorrow we let the calls of the shofar speak to our weary souls. Let the broken notes remind us that even though we are shattered now in this moment, we believe that redemption is still possible because we have the power to make it so. Tonight, I want to leave us with a poem. This poem was written by a mother in Israel whose son was taken hostage on October 7th. But I offer these words not in the name of politics, but because I believe that these words have the power to open our hearts to the call of the shofar, to the possibility of believing in redemption. Living in a broken world, she seems to say, does not mean that we have to become broken people. She writes, There is a Yiddish lullaby that says, "Your mother will cry 1,000 tears before you grow to be a man." I've cried 1,000,000 tears in the last 67 days. We all have. And I know that way over there is another woman who looks just like me, because we are all so very similar. She has also been crying. All of those tears, our sea of tears, they all taste the same. Can we take them, gather them up, and remove the salt, and then pour them over our desert of despair, and plant one tiny seed, a seed wrapped in fear, trauma, pain, and hope, and see what grows? Could it be that this woman, so very like me, that she and I could be sitting together in 50 years, laughing without teeth because we've drunk so much sweet tea together, and now we are so very old, and our faces are creased like worn-out paper bags, and our sons have their own grandchildren and have had long lives, one without an arm, but who needs 2 arms anyway? Is it all a dream, a fantasy, a prophecy? One tiny seed. In this new year, I pray that the tears that we have cried over these months born from sorrow and pain and anguish be gathered up and poured over our deserts of despair. May the cries of the shofar, those whole and broken notes woven together, offer a balm to our broken hearts and transform our tears into seeds of hope. I pray that this new year will be for all of us a year of healing, a year of hope, a year of peace for all of us who dare to dream of the possibility of redemption. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will. Shana Tova.